My brothers and sisters in Christ, in today's video, this will not be as much a reflection as a little bit of summary exegesis to contextualize the events we hear in today's first reading with the themes of the surrounding chapters of Genesis. Before the lectionary makes a little bit of a pivot tomorrow, I think it's important to see what's going on. We've seen from the beginning of the story of Abraham as he sets out on his journey, comes into this land that is promised. And the story, although the lectionary for the most part hasn't spoken much of Lot, the one relative that Abraham has with him on the journey is his nephew, Lot. And when they arrive there, he gives Lot his pick of which land to go set up as his, and Abraham takes the rest. So Lot has gone off on his own. Well, in the meanwhile, we've heard the story of Abraham, the promise of the great number of offspring. Once Abraham and Serra have sinned by trying to take matters into their own hands, not understanding how God will do this. And that's the whole affair of Serra having Abraham lie with her maid, from which Ishmael is born, and then driving her forth, and another kind of enemy line of the family tree is born. Now the angelic visitors have once again said that when the next time they visit within the year, that Sarah will be pregnant. And so picking up again tomorrow, we'll hear the story of Isaac and the fulfillment of this promise. And so we see the hard-headedness, the lack of trust of Abraham and Sarah versus the fulfillment when they put their trust in God. So in contrast, Lot is much more impetuous. He's not an evil man, but he is just prone to poorer judgment. He's more impetuous. And in all of this, he's held up by the book of Genesis as kind of a contrast to Abraham. Ultimately, Abraham's faithfulness is what wins out and makes of him the great nation. Well, in many ways, Lot would seem to be, at face value, a more appropriate candidate to make a great nation out of. Well, in the meanwhile, Lot has ended up in the city of Sodom, and we heard yesterday the intervention of Abraham, as the visitors, these strange angelic ghosts, and God himself say they must go visit. The cry out of the sins of Sodom need investigation. Abraham pleads, if there's anyone just to be found, that Sodom be spared, and God agrees. Well, the part we skip over now is what happens in Sodom, which is the two mysterious visitors, at a minimum angelic, go to visit Lot, and the great kind of sexual promiscuity of this city, the people of the city come to Lot's household and demand that they may know the visitors. And this is in the sense of biblical knowing, which is speaking. They want to have their way sexually with these visitors. This is where the explicit reference of sodomy, homosexuality associated with the sin of Sodom comes into play. But so essentially, based on this horrible sin, the people want to violate these angelic messengers, and so the writings on the wall, Sodom is to be destroyed. Well, we hear in today's story that Lot and his family are given a chance to flee. They're the only ones found worthy of saving in Sodom, and so they go forth. And then Sodom is destroyed by fire and brimstone. Interestingly enough, recent archaeological evidence has raised a theory, while not accepted by all, that has found in modern-day Jordan a site that seems to match up with Sodom, and the archaeological layer suggests that a meteoric blast, similar to events that happened in Russia in the early 20th century, seem to have hit this place, which means it's the equivalent of being hit with a nuclear bomb, or even greater than the events of like Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which would seem to parallel with this just cosmic event coming down and vaporizing these towns and killing the people. Well, from here, we see that Lot escapes with his daughters, but Lot's wife turns back, and she is lost in the flight as well. So this leaves us with just one last important event before we can get to tomorrow's first reading. And that is the book of Genesis goes on to tell that Lot flees and finds a remote cave that he lives in with his two daughters. The daughters go on to be worried that, separated from all other men, that there will be no way for them to have progeny. So they concoct this scheme by which each of them take turns plying their father with wine to get him drunk, to ultimately sleep with him, impregnate them, and it works. Both of them bear children, and this gives line to the lines of peoples that end up being the Moabites and the Ammonites. And so this sad story ends with Lot, through this kind of incestuous bond, again, progeny are found by human beings taking matters into their own hands. And so Lot's kind of somewhat tragic story ends with, once again, this non-sanctioned progeny versus the faithfulness of Abraham and Sarah, by which now God will bring forth the promised chosen descendants. And so, again, this isn't as much of a spiritual reflection. I'm trying to quickly fill in some blanks for you to understand the import of these events, which today's reading isn't so much focused on the sins of Sodom and why it gets destroyed, but the importance of that event in the story of Abraham and Lot, and how the scriptures are painting parallels between the stories of these two, God's fulfillment of promises, and how it's done in relation to our either trust or our own pridefulness in trying to steer events on our own. And so keep this in mind when the scriptures turn tomorrow to the birth of Isaac and the story of what will come next. May God bless you all.